Leading a startup team? Whether you're delivering a sugar rush, stocking coffee, or getting a regular delivery of snacks, Office Depot has solutions that fit every startup culture, from getting those first business cards and stationery to ordering fleece pullovers with your new logo. To learn how Office Depot and the California Technology Council have partnered to bring you savings on all of these startup essentials and more, go to californiatechnology.org/member benefits. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. The year 2015 was another big one for biotech, with record deal-making, big drug approvals, and solid performance overall. But it somehow didn't feel as good as it looks on paper. Pricing concerns that garnered big attention are expected to grow in intensity in the new year with the presidential election and negotiations for the renewal of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. We spoke to Adam Feuerstein, senior columnist for TheStreet.com, about the year in biotech, the highs and lows, and what's ahead for the new year. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Sure. Happy to be here.
Another year is in the books. There were 45 new drug approvals. Best year, I think, in 19 years. Biotech stocks as a whole outperformed the general market. Record M&A activity. On paper, it looks like another big year for biotech, but it sounds better than I remember it.
Yes, that is true.
How good a year was it for biotech?
Yeah, I mean, I think all those things that you said are true. So I think if you just kind of looked at the numbers, you might say, "Oh, it was another great year." But it was definitely, I think, it was a difficult year for people, challenging year. Partly that is because it's almost like two different years it built into one. We had like sort of the first half and the second half. The first half was go crazy. Everything was fantastic. And then kind of June, July, everything turned. So the market took a big downturn. IPO window kind of closed up, and it got ugly there for a while. And it's starting to come back. I mean, you look at the indices. It's kind of rebounding a little bit as we end the year. But it was definitely kind of a first half, second half kind of year.
It was a big year for drug approvals. You highlight Novartis' heart failure drug, Entresto, as the best approval. Why is that?
I was looking over all the drug approvals this year, and it seemed like Entresto was kind of the most significant approval of the year, just because there seems to be kind of incremental progress when it comes to cardiovascular heart disease and stuff, and they had that survival benefit for these patients who are who go into heart failure. So it seemed like that drug, among all the others, could really kind of change the standard of care in that disease. So that seemed like an appropriate best.
So there were also the PCSK9 drugs, the cholesterol drugs from Amgen and Regeneron and Sanofi. How big a deal do you see those drugs being?
I mean, I think they could be really big, but I think you're probably going to want. I mean, I think that until we get the the data on the cardiovascular outcomes, and if you see a survival, a mortality benefit in patients who take those, then I think that's when those drugs become big. Until then, and I think that they're going to be rather limited in use, and I think that's what you're seeing, kind of in the in the prescription data that's kind of come out since they were approval, is that that the insurance companies for sure are kind of fighting tooth and nail, right? They don't want those to become very widely used yet. So that's probably more of maybe a 16, 17 type story.
Well, your worst drug approval for the year was Sprout Pharmaceuticals' Adya, the drug for female sexual dysfunction. Sprout was acquired for $1 billion by Valeant following the approval. I encourage anyone who hasn't listened to our podcast with filmmaker Liz Canner, director of the documentary Orgasm Inc. This was a controversial approval for a drug with potential dangerous side effects and limited benefits. How did this drug get approved?
That's why I probably called it the worst drug approval. I don't know. We got approved. I mean, it seems like the FDA I think they had rejected this drug twice before. And there was just like this sort of fake, kind of grassroots campaign, that was totally funded by Sprout to kind of get to get people to lobby the FDA to approve this drug, which doesn't really do anything. A lot of people people look at the FDA like a pendulum, like in terms of sentiment, people say, oh, the FDA is, they're approving a lot of drugs and they're being very open to new drug approvals, or they're being very closed-minded, and I guess this is an example of a case where the FDA was just kind of maybe too open-minded about it.
Well, you also talked about 2015 being a disappointing year for CAR T therapies, the T cell immunotherapies. What made it so?
Yeah, I guess I just feel like I said they sort of treaded water this year, right? Because there hasn't really been a lot of advance, beyond kind of what we've seen before, right? We know that these CAR T therapies work really well in certain kinds of leukemias and maybe some lymphomas. But then the patients do relapse, and we really haven't seen any data like in solid tumors, and the whole commercialization. How are you going to make money, and how are you going to commercialize these? Which are obviously very complex manufacturing steps required to make these personalized engineered T cells. So I think you didn't see a lot of those kind of questions answered in 2015. So that was kind of where I sort of said, it's been sort of disappointing, because I think that, there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of work that needs to be done with those.
2015 was also a year where everywhere you turned, you seemed to hear about CRISPR, the gene editing technology. You called it the most overhyped technology of the year. We ended the year with a big dollar investment from Bayer in the technology, but do investors have unrealistic views of time horizons to see a technology like CRISPR turn into a marketed therapy?
Well, I think people get really excited about a lot of these new technologies, and I don't necessarily blame people for that. I mean, look, we saw that with gene therapy too, like in 2014, right? Everyone was going gaga over gene therapy, and what you see is that these things, there are bumps in the road, right? And they're like, we saw that 2015 for gene therapy was ended up being a very difficult year. Because there's some, scientific challenges that we're seeing that, it doesn't mean that the gene therapy is dead, but there's definitely some challenges ahead. And so with CRISPR, I mean, I just feel like this, it's like it seemed like a week didn't go by where there wasn't some big story in some magazine about, the revolution, the CRISPR revolution, gene editing, and so, yeah, it's very exciting. It's a cool tool that scientists are using, but, let's, where are the clinical trials, and where are the, practical applications, and what kind of bumps in the road are we going to see with those eventually when they do get put into patients. So I think I sort of called it overhyped just because I think that people are, excited about it and maybe, reasonably so, but, it's a long way off before, we're going to see these things approved.
Best CEO honors went to Brent Saunders of Allergan, a tough pick. I'm sure you had to really sweat that one out. He sold his company to Pfizer for $160 billion. How remarkable a deal was that, and what do you see Saunders' future being?
I mean, I think he'll be the CEO of whatever they're going to call that company. Well, I guess it'll be Pfizer or Allergan or whatever people are going to call it. He'll be right?
The Gaelic word for it.
He's certainly more charismatic than Ian Reed, right? I mean, Ian Reed's I'm sure he's a nice guy.
I've got a rock that's more charismatic than he.
Yeah, he's kind of boring. If you're going to lead the world's largest drug company, you maybe want to have a little bit of charisma. And he's young, right? So he's got all that going for him. I think that's where you see him. Eventually he'll run the company. And yeah, I mean, just in the sheer number of deals and sort of his meteoric rise through the ranks of the pharmaceutical industry, this was, capped off with this, with this big deal. It seemed like an appropriate CEO of the year, kind of a no-brainer.
Well, the worst CEO of the year was Michael Pearson of Valiant Pharmaceuticals. Valiant really had it all when it comes to scoring points in the worst category. Walk us through this pick.
Well, yeah, and that, again, it was probably not too hard of a decision either to name him the worst CEO, just because of everything that's happened with Valiant. Again, obviously it was a Wall Street darling for a long time. And sort of they championed that roll up specialty pharma strategy of buying companies and having the favorable tax inversions and all that stuff. And again, like a lot of investors loved Mike Pearson for all that he did for the stock price. But that seemed to all unravel this year when we have all these accusations and revelations about the specialty pharmaceutical, Philidor and all this other stuff, and shady accounting, and the way that they increased the price of their products, and so I think,
and not to mention the Sprout deal for $1 billion,
and not to mention the Sprout, and I think through it all, I think that the company has done just a really poor job of defending itself. Now, maybe they can't defend themselves because maybe people have dead to rights about what they're doing, but he just sort of came across as kind of this bumbling idiot a lot of times in terms of their defense. And I guess as we record this, I guess he's in the hospital with severe pneumonia, so maybe we shouldn't speak too badly of him because he's obviously ill. But I think again that was a story. And in terms of the scale and the size of it, right? I mean, in terms of the losses that were accrued by investors who were in that stock and saw the value of that stock fall throughout the year. That was a pretty easy pick.
I should remind listeners that your worst CEO for 2014 was Martin Shkreli.
Yes, he was.
2015, he became as close as a household name to anyone in the biotech industry, and quite possibly the most reviled man in biotech. Twitter had a Schadenfreude-Frest, if you want to call it that, with news of his arrest. But Shkreli did as much as anyone to move the issue of drug pricing front and center. You said drug pricing was the big issue in 2015, but with an election year and negotiations for new prescription drug user fee act underway, how heavily will drug pricing weigh on stocks, and do you think we'll have real action taken in 2016?
I think just like this year, 2016 will be another year where drug pricing and that discussion will be at the center point. The focus of a lot of discussion, a lot of talk about it. I don't necessarily think that anything is going to be done about it in 2016. I mean, we have the election. Obviously, it's an election year. I think what's interesting is that if you ask Republicans and Democrats about drug pricing, I mean, everyone seems to agree. When you poll people that that they're concerned about the escalating price of drugs. But I bet if you did the follow-up question, if you ask them like what you want to do about it, like what is your solution, Democrats and Republicans are going to have different answers to that question, right? So I think that's where it gets tricky, because just like we've seen with other sort of hot button political issues, what ends up happening is nothing, right? We get gridlock. So I guess a lot of it depends on what happens with the election and who wins the presidency, whether the Republicans keep control of Congress or not. And that will help shape kind of what happens to, policy and in terms of if there's anything done with drug pricing. But again, the issue is just going to sort of hang out there, in the ether for another year.
Well, 2015, as we mentioned, was another big year for M&A, a record, I believe. What do you see happening in 2016? And as the Allergan deal shows us, despite congressional action, inversions have not gone away.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably part of the impetus to getting that Pfizer Allergan deal done is because I guess there are changes that are being put in place, and they need to get that deal done sooner rather than later. So we may see more of that. I think a lot of it was a big year for M&A, but again, there wasn't. I think towards the back end of the year, maybe there wasn't as many deals because I think there's been some concern about valuations. From a buyer standpoint, I think there was maybe some reluctant buyers out there. I'm sure there's a lot of companies that wanted to sell themselves, but in terms of the buyers, I think there was a lot of concern about what am I paying for here. So I think a lot I don't know, 2000. I never get these predictions right about M&A. I don't know. 2016. Yeah, we'll have more M&A. I mean, how's that? There will be more deals, and hopefully, if there's one, then I'll be right.
So you heard it here first.
Yeah, exactly. I'm making a bold stand here.
JP Morgan's kicking off in January as it starts the new year in biotech. You didn't go last year, did you?
I did not. I did not go. I was not in San Francisco last year. No.
How did that work covering it remotely, and what are your plans for this year?
I am going this year, so I will be there. I actually, it was okay not being there. I think what you sort of miss is, you do get sort of that buzz. You kind of, you're sitting around at a cocktail party. Yeah, the free parties are good. But even more than that, it's just like you kind of, the news is the news, right? And it comes out, and it doesn't matter really where you are because you see it, and you can digest it. But it's more just the kind of that, networking, sort of hanging out with people at some party. You hear something. That stuff, obviously, you can't do if you're not there. So I'm going. I'll be there. I'm excited about it. Anytime I get.
And are you looking for anything special at this year's meeting?
No, not really. I mean, it's more of the same. I think this year, I think people are going. I think that I think the mood last, heading into the new year last year, people were very, they were very excited. They were very confident. There was a very jubilant mood. I think this year people are, a little bit less so. It was, like I said in the beginning, it was a very difficult. I think for investors, it was a very challenging year to make money because of the volatility, the turbulence of the year. Up and down. It's hard to make consistent money when the stocks are doing that. So I think people it was just an exhausting year. When I talked to people, I was down at the American Society of Hematology meeting in December, and I was talking to a lot of investors, and everyone just told me how exhausted they were. And this is investors I'm talking to. So I think that people were sort of trying to rest up, and they wanted the new year to start. They wanted to get a fresh start. But so I think that people will not, I think the mood will be, the mood is always sort of celebratory, and people are always optimistic at the beginning of the year. So I think you'll definitely sense that at JP Morgan, but maybe a little bit less than we saw last year.
Adam Feuerstein, senior columnist for TheStreet.com, and you can follow Adam on Twitter at Adam Feuerstein. Adam, thanks as always.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.